I've got a book called Historical Jesus where I list a dozen and a half texts, many of them outside the New Testament, in the ancient world for the existence of Jesus. But one probably better example I would use, some say, yeah, but you're a Christian. Okay, Bart Ehrman, an atheist New Testament scholar. Bart Ehrman gives 15 independent sources for the crucifixion of Jesus within 100 years. Now, 100 years is actually kind of strict, but it's a nice, narrow parameter for saying Jesus lived. 100, and here's an atheist, 100 years time, 15 different sources evidencing Jesus' death. If he died, he had to have lived. So Bart Ehrman calls that one of the two best evidences we have for that Jesus lived in history. The other one is that Paul is the best New Testament reference we have. Critics talk about half of Paul's epistles, 7 out of 13, being accredited, and you can use them in arguing because they're great sources. Well, the best thing Paul gives us is that he was an eyewitness to the eyewitnesses. Paul, in Galatians 1 and again in Galatians 2, he went to Jerusalem and got to know Peter, James, the brother of Jesus. Then in Galatians 2, John, they're all together. And the topic they're discussing, as Paul tells us, is the nature of the gospel, to make sure they're all on the same page. And Paul concludes, yes, they're all on the same page. But here, that's two great sets of data for the existence of Jesus. 15 independent sources for the crucifixion of Jesus, and Paul knowing himself, of course, Peter, James, and John, the big four. He knows all of them, and he can ask whatever questions he wants to about what Jesus looked like when he was walking and talking in Galilee. So it would be like asking George Washington or asking Thomas Jefferson, what was George like? Asking Adams and John Quincy Adams and Monroe and so on. What do you know about George? And then it'd be really cool if you could talk to Martha. And that's neat because we have the women's testimony for going to the tomb and so on. So you make a multifaceted case for George Washington being the first president of the United States. We can do the same thing with Jesus actually having existed. And as Bart Ehrman says, he knows of nobody, no accredited specialist in the field of religion, no matter how liberal or how atheist or whatever, none of them who will have university, college, or seminary positions, none of them teach that Jesus never lived. The guys who teach it and claim to be scholars are people who don't have accredited degrees. He said with two exceptions, is Bart's count. The rest do not have accredited degrees, and none of them have university positions. I do a minimal facts argument, and I use basically 6 minimal facts. Well, the 2 criteria I use is that I won't use a fact that's not multiply evidenced from a bunch of different sources. And secondly, because of that, the vast majority of scholars in the 90-something percentile allow its historicity. Well, everybody grabs onto this one. Everybody concedes it. And I'm almost never asked, how do you know these facts are true? So I put a list together. And if you count all the individual pieces of data that accredit these 6, it's over 100. Over 100. Here's the key. Critically ascertained facts that the critics would agree to. That's why the critics don't disallow the facts. We're playing their game. And I would say Jesus died by crucifixion. His disciples had experiences that they believed were appearances of the risen Jesus. Because of their belief that he was raised, it is the event that has turned the world upside down religiously. In fact, a recent book on non-believing Jews and the resurrection, they even acknowledge, not being Christians, that Christianity is a resurrection religion. It was the resurrection that powered the religion, powered the teachings, even to the point of being willing to die. And we do have first century sources for arguably the 3 largest names in Christianity. 4, very important, it was proclaimed very early. And today, critics, the consensus position is that you can track the resurrection preaching back to immediately after the cross. In fact, the way it's often stated by, say, Bart Ehrman, is that when Paul said yes to Jesus on the way to Damascus, there was already a body of data called the early creeds that are later written in the New Testament, but they were already being noised abroad. When Paul said yes, there were these heavy creeds, about 80% of which are on the deity, death, resurrection of Jesus, because that's a major message. They were already in existence. So when Paul didn't invent Christianity, the main reason, when he came to Christ, the message he hated most, we already have data from that 2-year period before Paul. And then the last two would be individuals, James, the brother of Jesus, and Paul, both of whom become Christians because they believed they had experiences which were appearances of the risen Jesus. Those are the 6 I would use. And to my knowledge, I've had dialogues with atheists, agnostics, scholars, specialists, and they don't dispute any of those.